So I'm going to be talking about some work we've been doing at Panlex, along with, the support of the Internet Archive, on their Balinese digital library and what we've made from it. So first, these are Balinese lontar. In fact, that is a photograph of this one, which you can come up and see afterwards. And I'll tell you what it is in a little bit. But these are, I assume if you're here tonight, you know about palm leaves. But I just want to show a little, so I didn't know hardly anything about palm leaves until, I don't know, earlier this year. I knew they existed, and that was about it. And they're a form of writing that's been used for how long, Mary? For millennia, right? But I don't know how many millennia. And so these are, until recently in Bali, were the primary written medium, and they're still widely used. And by written medium, we mean really just writing. Everything you might want to write or draw, I suppose, you could put on these. And they're formed in this shape. That was one of my first questions, by the way. The reason they're this shape, I asked some people, I said, why are they this shape? And then I saw the tree, and the leaves are this shape, they're just longer. But so you can't have a format like a paper like we have. It has to be made out of the leaves. And this height is sort of a common height they use in Bali because all leaves pretty much can be widely found. So you could make it technically a little bit bigger for something, not all. So they make it, that's a standard. And then the length actually varies quite a bit. The longer one is more valuable because they're more rare. So here's how the actual writing works in Bali. So I'm going to show just this short video. It's about 2 minutes long, and this is really informative. So it's not the same as writing on paper, and when you see how it actually works. So it's a little knife.
Ini emergency misalnya digoreng tapi nggak pakai minyak, ya kalau buat minyak sendiri dibakar, jadi dipanggang biar nggak terbakar. Kenang-kenangan masuk dia nanti pemisahan lontar.
Okay. So I just think it's really cool. I mean, the whole process, the physical process is really different. And so what we're talking about today is the digitization, but I think it's really profound that, a lot of the details of how these things are actually created is different. So you have the grooves from the knife, and then you got to fill it in with the black. And there's different things people use to create the grooves. There's different things people use to fill it in. That's a candle nut, which is common in Indonesian cuisine. So if you ever had sambal from Indonesia, it's got almost for sure got a candle nut in it. And it's kind of oily, and I guess it just, when you burn it, make the soot or the ash, it just forms a good ink, which, somebody must have figured that out. So as I said, lontar is, by the way, it's just the name in Indonesia for palm leaf, for the particular tree that's used, and then the manuscripts that they're created on. So it means palm leaf manuscript that's sort of in a local context. The ones we're going to be talking about today, they're all written in Balinese script, which is known as Aksara Bali in Indonesia, and I'll refer to it that way because I like the name. But that is a way of writing. So it's like an alphabet. It's like the Latin or Roman alphabet. You don't have to write a particular language in it. In reality, there's only so many languages that have been written in it. But our alphabet for English, is really an alphabet that was used to write Latin. It can be used to write French, to write German, a whole bunch of languages. So it's not just the Balinese language that we've written, it's also Old Javanese. And here we see, so there's Java. The kingdoms of Java were very influential in the area, and so Bali is this little island here, was heavily influenced by Java. And so the prestige language is Old Javanese, also known as Kawi. And then the Balinese language is a different language. It's related, but it's not super closely related. So you can write Lontar in Old Javanese, you can write them in Balinese, you can write them in a mixture of the two. You can also, I'm talking about Balinese Lontar in particular. There's also Javanese Lontar. But you can write Balinese Lontar also in the Balinese script using Sasak. So there are people on this island of Lombok here, different language, actually somewhat closely related to Balinese, but not the same. And so they can use the same alphabet or writing system for that too. I would say the majority of the Lontar in the collection are Old Javanese or Balinese, mostly with some Old Javanese at least, if not a lot. And but the Balinese, depending on the work in question, if you are a modern Balinese person who speaks Balinese, if you learn to read and write the alphabet, which they all learn in school, and then some retain, some forget, but they all are taught it. If you could sound it out, there's a chance you could understand some of it. There's a chance you could understand actually quite a lot of it. It just depends on how modern the work is. And then if it has Old Javanese or older forms of Balinese, that's definitely something you would have to study harder to learn. But there are people, more and more people these days, who are being trained in universities who are curious about the literature that comes from Bali. And I should also mention nowadays Balinese, when it's written, is usually written in the Latin script. So there's a way of writing that looks kind of like Indonesian spelling. But you can absolutely write it this is how it was originally written and can still be written. And there's more and more signs in Bali popping up that are using it. Lontar, like I said, Balinese Lontar, they can have all kinds of stuff. So there's a tendency to assume, and this is a tendency that I'm not really sure if it comes from outside Bali, from inside Bali, or both, probably. Some people think that it's only sacred texts that are on Lontar. And that's certainly true, but there's all sorts of stuff here. So we have magic, which I guess is sort of, I don't know if that's sacred or not, but that's a thing that could be connected with religion. But then you have medicine, you have chronicles, you have classifications of things. So you have works that are like, here's all the kinds of horses in the world, and if you want to pick one, here's how you know which one to pick. Here's all the kinds of cats in the world. So that's what this is. This is a classification of cats, and I'll get into that. There's also a classification of people, and that's when you want to choose a mate. So, those are not sacred texts. They're just, there's how-to guides, like how to do something you might want to do, like anything really. There's popular verse and stories. So it's like, it's kind of like the equivalent of a novel in a way, like things you pass around that are entertaining. And people have a sense of like, it's a wide range. So just like we would think, well, certain works like the Bible or whatever work you're talking about is sacred, and then other things are like Dr. Seuss. It's just like they're just books. Are not inherently sacred, but they just have all sorts of stuff. And so that's been one of the really entertaining things for me, is understanding better as an outsider and somebody who's not trained in this particularly, what's in this literature. And that's one of the great things about this project, is making it more widely accessible both to people in Bali and outside Bali. So this started the genesis of our work was the Balinese Digital Library 2011, which Brewster and Mary here created in 2011. So they worked with major collections in Bali to photograph 130,000 Lontar leaves, which contain 3,000 complete works, and it's essentially the whole literature of the nation of Bali, give or take, or on the margins. And as far as I know, it's the first time a whole nation's literature has been digitized in its entirety. So if you're going to do that for English literature, that would be a bigger project. But there's a lot of literatures around the world that are incredibly rich and interesting and fascinating, but are not widely known. And you can talk about why, but one reason is, well, there's just nowhere to find them easily. So they've probably been ignored because people may have just not thought about them much, but the more they're available, the easier it is to bring them out to the open and to share them with the world. So it turned out that this was a great thing. You can go through, browse online at archive.org, you can see all the images, but it's not quite enough to make it useful for everyone in all the ways you might want. So it's not interactive, there's no sort of community around it, you're just one person browsing a page, and you've got the images, which, depending on who you are, you may or may not find easy to read and make sense of. So they may be challenging, they may be hard, the letters might be not quite the shapes you're used to because there's a lot of different hands. So we wanted to, they wanted to create something more useful for the community, and that's where Panlex came in earlier this year. So we have the Palm Leaf Wiki at palmleaf.org, and Let me just explain to you first a little bit about what Panlex is. We are a project of the Long Now Foundation, which is headquartered here in San Francisco. And our main product is a translation database of every word in every language. And generally, we try to support communities around the world that speak languages that are not as widely supported through various technological means. And so this fits in really well. It's not a dictionary, but it fits in very well in terms of our mission. And you can think of us as like linguists with technical skills, basically. So we're trained as linguists, but we have technical skills. And there's a lot of technical details involved here, so that's part of what I'm going to talk about. So on palmleaf.org, which is set up for any Palmleaf manuscript that could be pulled from the Internet Archive, or I guess from anywhere, but that's, it's really meant to be, just sort of a spin-off of the Internet Archive. You can create a wiki page by importing an Internet Archive item, and then you get it looking like this. And so we have, this is sort of pre-populated, like there's a description heading. You could add more, but it's set up with a description heading. This will tell you that's the title of the work. You've got a link to the original. So you've got the sort of thumbnails of the pages, and then I'll show you what's below that. But you can get some descriptions. So that's entered by contributors. It can be entered in multiple languages. So depending on who you are, you might prefer it in Indonesian or English. And then you can have the text from those Lontar leads can be typed. It can be input by a person who knows how to read it by typing through each one and figuring out what it says and how it should be written. And then the part above that is in Balinese, in Aksara Bali, that's the part they type. And then there's an automatically generated romanization below. And we can modify the rules if people don't like them or have alternatives. But basically, if you can't read this very easily, you can read it down there. You're actually missing the spaces, but other than that, you're not missing much. So there are no spaces in the original, and so the word breaks, the commas are there because there's a punctuation like a comma in the original. But between the commas, maybe you should have a space. But basically, it is readable and very useful for people who can't read the Aksara Bali. And then you could add spaces later if you need to. So in order to do this, there's got to be a way to type that. And on our keyboard, there's not typically Balinese letters. So we had to make something that looks like this. So we've got an interface where you've got the higher resolution image. You can zoom in, you can pan around, because you can't, on those screens, unless they're shaped like a Lontar leaf, which they typically aren't, you can't really view the whole leaf if it's really long. So you got to zoom in and kind of scroll through. And then you can type in there. This is an on-screen keyboard. This is one way to type in Balinese script that we have created. There's other ways. So you can have, depending on, most of our users actually in Bali, they would use this if they had to, if there's no other option, like for certain characters, they can't remember how to type, but it's kind of slow because you kind of got to point your mouse at it, but it definitely works, and it works on phones, which is important. And the website will provide this font for this script, for the Balinese script, because most people would not necessarily have it installed on their computer. So we have to make it so, when you open it on your device, it actually works. So there were some technical challenges to this, and that's actually, there's sort of two parts to this story. The first part is solving technical problems. The second part is organizing a group of people who want to actually make this happen in Bali, because I am not a person qualified to type this. I can learn the script, but I can't read the Lontar and type it accurately. I don't know all Japanese. I don't know Balinese. I do know Indonesian, but it only goes so far. So here's kind of some of the things you need to do to make Aksara Bali or any form of writing work in technology. And this is a whole topic that I can't really describe in detail, but I'm going to go through the basics here. So it has to be in Unicode, which is a character encoding standard that is an international standard. And without Unicode, it makes it very challenging to use something you can't really, it might be tied to the font that you're using. And so if you change the font, you can't read it anymore. If you send a message to someone, they can't read it. So without that, it's it's hard to really do much, although people do, but it doesn't work very well. And in Bali, so Balinese has been encoded in Unicode since 2005, but not that many people in Bali use Unicode, standard Unicode fonts, because there really aren't that many, although some people in this room have made some, or helped make some. Basically, we needed something that would work for the purpose at hand. And so there is a free font from Google called Noto Balinese, which existed, and we kind of hoped it would be good enough, but it turned out not to be. Then we needed a way to type it, and especially on a web page, and there was nothing pre-existing for that. So we needed to create a lot of create or improve or adapt a lot of things, and we had to make sure it would work on phones because so many people these days are only using phones. So whether they're typing on a phone, whether they're reading on a phone, if you can't use it on a phone, it's only going to reach so many people. So I'm just going to go into a little bit of this. I'm going to start with the font, which is easier to point to. So the design of the keyboard is kind of a little harder to point at, but this is, I think, more fun. So first of all, here's what the letters look like. You've already seen a few of them. So these are consonants, and this is not all of them, but this is the most common ones. And so just to give you a look at what it looks like. And one thing, I'll just point to this real quick. So one thing I noticed, it takes a while to get an eye for these things. So if you look at like the ha on the top left and the la on the upper right, you see the squiggles are not quite on the same side. So there's like, those are things that are very easy to mix up. Or if you look at the sa versus the cha. So would you see what the difference is? So I want to involve, for this part, I want to involve you guys. So
More bendy.
More bendy on the cup.
Yeah. So
Your wave is cresting.
okay. So, and these are things that you can imagine. So you can imagine if you have a manuscript, it's not like printing on it's not like a font that's always identical every time. And so you have to, people have told me actually when they read a Lontar work and it's from a different scribe than they've read before, they have to kind of get used. The first experience is sort of adapting to like how they write. And of course, if you know the language, you can kind of fill in the blanks, going, oh, that must have been, that word has a sa in it, not a cha, so that's the one it must have been. Okay, so now I'm going to get to, so here's the vowels, but I'm not going to tell you where the vowels are. I want you to figure it out. So let's see. Tell me about something here that you think is a vowel, and I guess I'll ask the people who already know Balinese script to not say.
Sa was on your list of consonants.
Aha, so that's something to keep in mind. So I'll pronounce this first. This is sa, si, su, se, so. So it's kind of like the way the vowels sound in Spanish, if you know how that's spelled. So we'll come back to the sa. That's the one you've already seen. How about the si?
At the top.
Okay, so there's a little thing at the top. That's, I shall point it on here. Is this working? Yeah. That's that little loopy thing is the E, okay? And then how about the oo? Okay, got a loop at the bottom. How about the A?
It's before.
Now it's on the left, but it's pronounced after. So you got to know it's a mark that appears on the left, but it's pronounced se, not s or something.
Right.
Now how about the O?
It's the loop at the end with the squiggle.
Okay, you need both. You've got a thing on the left and on the right. The one on the right actually creates a ligature, so it's a single character that is sort of fused together, and that's O together. So if you've got just the thing on the left, that's A. If you've got both of them, it's O. And you can think of it like it's made up of different marks or strokes, but it's conceptually kind of one thing. Okay, so now that we've seen this, what is the ah?
Assumed.
It's assumed. But when can you assume it?
When you just see it.
Okay, so when there's nothing else, the ah is the absence of everything else.
Oh.
So this is a kind of alphabet or writing system called, it's not really an alphabet actually, it's an abugada. So most of the scripts of India work this way. So it's not, so I called these consonants, but really they are pronounced as, so when you want just a consonant and not the ah assumed, you have to actually add something or do something else. So that's what we're going to get into next. Okay, so T. Okay, this one on the left. So this one should be comprehensible because we haven't seen, well, we saw the top, we didn't really focus on it, but it works the same as C, it's just a different consonant, okay? And now we're going to combine that and get sti. So what do you think is going on in that one?
C with an extra glyph.
Yeah, so there's, And what do you think that glyph is?
It's the thing under.
But I mean, what?
Oh, it's the T cell?
Yeah, so it turns out that this glyph below here, this one, when it's below it looks like that. When it's above, it looks like that. So you've got the base form and the below form, which do not necessarily, sometimes they look the same, but they don't necessarily look the same. And
Yeah.
sometimes actually, the one below looks the same as a different one above.
Right.
So you actually have to know, what is it? Na above looks the same as ka below. So like if an N or a K, it's like so you have to know not just all the consonants in their normal form, but how they look below and above. Okay. And then the vowel comes after that stack of two consonants. So the way you indicate essentially that this is sti and not something like sati is that you put something below. So if you had the sa and then the t after it to the right, that would be a vowel and then a consonant and a vowel. But this is a cluster or combination of consonants. Okay? Ri. That's just what an R looks like in its base form. So what's going on with tri? So do you see how that is how is that composed? The E I guess is clear. The T vowel, the ta part is on the top, right? It's the same as the T, the base, but we've got a ta. And then we've got someone's making a so that takes that loop.
Is the tail taken from the second half of the re character?
The second half. What do you mean by the second half?
Like so there's the first point and then there's the second curve. And like is it sort of shifted so that
You mean
like,
this?
Yeah.
I actually don't know historically where it comes. Ben, do you know?
No.
Okay. So all I
Ben
know
doesn't
is
know.
that learn this is that that's what the ra looks like below. So just like the ta here below, it just kind of gets condensed. Like it has one less stroke over here. The ra below really looks quite different, and you just have to know that's what it means. And also, as a designer, I should also mention it is supposed to be the same width as the consonant above. So what we ended up doing with this font is making a ligature, a special glyph for our font. The designer drew it for every consonant what an R looks like below, so it's perfectly width. Because we were actually happy with it being like three options, like wide, medium, and narrow. And then he thought that he eventually got on his nerves and that doesn't look good enough. So that's three. Okay, now I'm going to help you out by going back one before the through. I'll get to in a second. Okay, you see the su?
Oh, yeah.
See our u? So keep in mind our u. Here's our through.
They just said,
Yeah. So this u, I don't know what you should have done as a designer of this script. Like that's a sort of whole separate question how this came about. But like you could have looped it below. You got to somehow indicate both are there. You've got the R below, and you've got so it kind of goes off on the side, that little thing. So that's what we got here. Okay. So some of the vowels. So if it was on top, like three, it doesn't interfere. So you just leave it there, in the same way it should be. But that one's got to go in there. Okay. How about stri? So what's going on? So we have sti. So you see how the R is going there?
Yeah.
It's going around. So it's very similar to the one below, but it has to sort of sweep around. And this is another one where theoretically you would need a bunch of different sizes because the thing it encloses could be like really wide, really narrow. There's not infinite possibilities, but you can get away with a couple different widths of this. But yeah, to make it look good, they're sort of making it work and they're making it look good. Yeah, Manish?
Is there a reason why the first form doesn't ligature with the sa like in Greek?
Say that again?
Is there a reason why the big hook-shaped ra doesn't ligature with the first consonant sa?
Oh, okay. So you're saying it could have been like here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's just not how the script works. It's not an option. I don't know how it would look aesthetically. I mean, it would interfere. It would kind of run across this one. But you'd have to ask somebody who
So that's not an option.
it's not an option. You have to have a separate glyph that loops around. And there's only, and by the way, there's not that many 3 consonant combinations. So certain theoretically possible ones don't really have this problem where you have to have 3 all in one stack. But the R as the last one is really common. One thing I should also mention, if this was like a word that this three part, so I mentioned there's no spaces, but I forgot to mention something else, which is, well, it wouldn't have made sense at the time, but if you had a word that ends in T, like the letter T, the consonant T, and then the next word begins in V, you might actually write it this way.
No.
So not only are there no spaces, but that doesn't even mean they belong to the same word necessarily. So when I say three consonants in a row, you might think that's within one word, but not necessarily. It could be like ST at the end of one word and D at the beginning of another. Or S at the beginning of end of one word and 3 at the, So now it's not, you don't have to write it this way. Like there's other ways to like, but you can write it this way if you want to between breaking up words. Yeah?
When you're saying that between words this happens, is this like if the word ends in a s or a s?
S with no vowel.
And Balinese words sometimes do end without the vowel.
Correct. Correct. Yes, there are Balinese words that end with just a consonant. Like ketut is a common name, for example. So that would be like ketus, and then ri, the beginning of the next word or something. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a comparison. So here we have the word mantra, which means mantra. So people in Bali are Hindu, and mantras are a thing. So we have here, so this is ma, this is na, but then we've got the t. So this should all mostly make sense now. Na, that's the ta below, that's the ra, and then there's no vowel around here, so it's a, so ntra here, and then that's ma ntra, okay? So that's the font that Penlex helped create with a designer named Aditya Bayu Perdana, who actually designed the glyphs. There we have below Noto Serif Balinese from Google. This is not correct. So it's not just a little bit wrong, it's actually wrong. So what is wrong with this?
Well, it doesn't have that.
Well, how is
All the
the
way to
ra at the end being represented?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the R here is so narrow that it looks like a bar.
Yes,
So it's
exactly.
not
So, but it is rendered as if it was this kind of a ra, okay? So it's like all you got to do is add a loop at the bottom, and this one is sort of like, well, that T below, we can just put the loop on that. But really the loop has to come around, and as Norbert said, if you had a W, so if you had a word mantua, which probably doesn't exist, but if you did, that thing below would look like that's how the wa would look. And so it actually is not just wrong, it creates confusion. And so you can't really ask people to transcribe Lontar and say, well, you're going to have to get used to all the weird ways we incorrectly do your own script in order to correctly do this. People who type need to be able to see it, have it show up the way it should show up, and when they read, they need to be able to, and then other things are stylistic, yeah?
Up to this point, I thought that the script would be read from right to left. But the way that you read it just now, it looks like you were reading this word left.
Correct. It is left to right, and then within these clusters, it's top to bottom. So yes, it is absolutely, I should have said that actually, yes, it's left to right. So here's another little detail of what you have to do to get fonts to look good. So as you have strings of characters, you have alignment issues. So like in our script, you have a little bit of space between each character. So here we have samba. So you've got sa, mba, that's a cluster. Okay? These words don't mean anything, it's just to illustrate. And so now if we have sumba, the u, so the ba below kind of sticks out to the left. So you see what happened? So we added some space. And I actually made this so the space would be exactly the amount that the ba sticks out to the left of the ma. So for every combination where the consonant below is wider, I made a little adjustment. But only, because if you did it on the samba, you could do it and it would work in the sense that it wouldn't create a collision, but it would look really bad. So you always want it to be like the baseline characters to be spaced normally unless you have to move them. And somebody who was doing this, by the way, on the leaf, the really correct way to do this would be to have a narrower ba. At least some people would do it that way, so that it doesn't stick out so much and it would look better. So that would be even better, but there's only so much you can do, so this is where we where we do the line. But there's a lot of spacing things like this where different combinations. So like if you imagine, for example, this through, that's great if there's nothing in the way, but if there's something in the way with that ooh sticking out to the right, you got to make sure it doesn't, something gets adjusted. So there's like, and it's actually hard as like, this is sort of like programming, but you have a lot of things to consider in terms of the combinations of like predicting when to do it and don't do it when you shouldn't. Okay, so actually I'm running a little bit long on this. So, well, let me just show you this real fast. Okay, so let's get here to palmleaf.org. Oh, I'm not online. Okay, maybe.
Oh, there's Wi-Fi here.
Yeah,
Um,
SFCD.
okay.
Live demo.
And the password?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you're going to California. Okay. Sorry, I forgot about that.
That was a great question, and I'll tell you like way more details than you ever want to know later.
Would love to know all of them. I'm just the intuitive thing, and it clearly is wrong.
Yeah. Oh, great. That was on one.
Okay, so here we have palmleaf.org. So we've got a. Oops.
He would.
It's not. we gotta- Aha. All right. So here you can see a list of all of the things that have been typed so far. So here, this is like the index page for Balinese. There's a documentation. This is all in Indonesian because our contributors are in Bali. And I mean, it could be in Balinese, but this sort of thing is typically done in Indonesian. It also opens it up to other people in Indonesia who are interested. So like our font designer is actually Javanese, and he doesn't speak Balinese, but he does speak Indonesian. So like he can help with documentation, that kind of thing, which he wanted to do. So this is going to explain to you like all our standards for transcription and how you get your fonts installed. Of course, they can be served on the website, but people want to use them on the computer and that kind of thing. And then here's a list of things that have been typed. So I'll just go to the one that I didn't talk about, the conservation of cats. So you get this, and then so here's the overview. Here's the transcription. If you want to go in and edit, so well you can use this to read it. I'll go to the edit view actually. So you can go into edit, and then it pulls up this thing, which you can zoom into here. There's actually a separate font you can choose. So like, you know, there's sort of like a more modern looking font that Bayou designed. So you can switch your font and your keyboard switches. You can, if you're wondering about the transliteration, you can, hopefully this will work. Yeah, there we go. It'll pop up whatever you've typed in the transliteration for you. So if you change this, that would change when you re-showed it. And then you can, you know, this is like getting numbers, so Ben made a little thing here for this. You can get different letters by holding down Shift. And then you can also, so this is a lot of work actually.
Yeah.
And
You say.
Type the letter so it shows the choices of the consonant clusters.
oh, good point. Okay, so here, no, I'm not going to delete anything. This is just on the screen. It's not going to change. So, okay, right. So it changes. So, okay, so let me see what I should do here. Okay, so there's our R, okay? This is Ra, there's Ka. So when we type Ka, okay, now this is the way you do, so this sign is an explicit sign saying there's no consonant after, I mean there's no vowel after it, sorry. This little question mark looking thing. So if I type this in, this is the Unicode way to indicate that there's no vowel, and then it will not be displayed depending on what comes after. So if it's Kra, you just end up with the loop below. You don't actually see this sign. But by typing this, we're saying we don't want a vowel, and now this will change to show you what all the combinations. So look, there's Kna, and that, or sorry, that's Ka, I'm sorry. So this thing below looks like, well, you can't see it now. Anyway, I wouldn't get too confusing. But there's Kra, okay. And so that's a Na above, there's a Ka. But if you had a Ka below, it actually looks exactly like a Na above. So that you really have to know your above and below form as well.
But it gives you the choices right there.
You've got your vowels here as well. So here's Ku. And if you wanted to do, well, I think this is enough for now. So I want to get to, so this is kind of like the part one, and I've talked about this more because it's the part that I know more about. I am not the community in Bali, so I can talk about them, and I'm really happy to talk about them, but it'd be better for them to talk for themselves. So basically, it turned out we tried a few different ways to get in touch with people in Bali. We went through university. It turned out to be a lot of red tape. But Bayu, our font designer, actually knows a Balinese guy who is a font designer, and then he knows other people. So we got into this sort of this big WhatsApp group that ended up, and I said, hey, I've got this project where we're going to be transcribing and typing into Unicode a bunch of things, and they turned out they were very interested. So they're in their 20s and 30s, and they were just sort of very interested in learning more about Lontar. They've had classes at university and stuff, but they're not experts, but they're very interested. They know a lot more than anyone normally would, other than the professor. And so I went to Bali in August to sort of get everyone together. So here's some of us. The guy on the left actually runs. He's not typing on the site. Everyone else is, but he's the director of a Lontar Museum in Karangasem. So he was also very supportive of this, saying that basically like we need to get as much of this online and out there for everyone in Bali and for the world. I also got to meet some people so these folks, the guy on the right is Idewo Gede Chatra, who is a kind of a renowned Lontar scholar and knows more than anyone else pretty much about all of the details of like how, which trees to grow, where to grow them, how to harvest them, how to prepare the leaves, how long to keep them in the press, how to, write on them, all this stuff. So like, he has a super encyclopedic knowledge of that, and he's also an expert in the literature. And he's not an expert on digital technology per se, but he said, well, we need to get the younger generation on board here. We need as many, and so he has workshops. So I hope that people will hopefully go into Hanli for information, and they'll get excited, and then they'll say, well, who's in my community actually works on this, and then they go to see them. So that's certainly one of the hopes. And then here's another group I went to just to show you. So we all, so these, and by the way, when I met with them, a lot of it was like, wait, where's that font? And it's like, is it working on Windows? And then it turned out that like this version of Windows supports that doesn't. But like they're getting really excited. They're like, hey, this exists because and Bayu had a separate font he made, and they're like, oh, we're so tired of this old pre-Unicode font. It all looks the same. We have one font for the whole island, and it'd be really great to have, So I'm really optimistic that people are like, actively, getting interested in this. And the challenge, like with anything else, is like, well, who's going to pay for, does it pay the bills? And these people, some of them are actually government employed, so they're actually being paid to do cultural work. So that's really great. And they may not be paid a lot, but they're, that's a cool thing. So here's what we have come up with. This was between, I guess I would say, June and October-ish. So that was the span that we were shooting for our target. We got 3,000 leaves typed. So one front and back, one of these. Of course, the lengths are different, but this is, is about what they look like. And that's 92 complete works. So that list I was showing you was the complete works. There's also below like ones that are in progress. And here's some examples. There's all kinds of stuff. So the regulations for a particular village in Bali when they have their little council meeting, what the procedures are, like Robert's Rules of Order kind of thing, or like who's allowed to, if someone new arrives, whether they're going to be allowed in or not, or things like that. We've got our taxonomy of cats. We've got a poem, like an epic type poem, but it's an atlas of the world. So it's sort of like if you know about like geographies, like people like Strabo in Rome, like would write works that would explain all the places in the world and what they are. So this is kind of that format, but it's for sort of like the whole. It was written in the 19th century, so we knew like where everything was that we approximately that we now know about. Here's is the medicinal text. I really love the better's cockfighting horoscope. It's kind of hard to summarize. It's essentially you like to go to the cockfights and bet, and you want to win, and you want to know, well, which rooster do you bet on? It's like, how are you supposed to know? It's like, well, it's not necessarily like which one looks the strongest. It's like depending on the date. So it's not the zodiac horoscope. It's sort of like some other horoscope-like thing. It's depending on the date in the Balinese calendar. That's a propitious day for you to bet on the one with the black feathers with the white spots. But then if you can imagine your competitors have their own horoscopes, so it's like, who knows which one. But that's like, that it's totally about just like winning the bets. Guide to rainmaking. This is a sort of philosophical work on, So these folks we got in touch with were really interested in this, and these are the ones they chose, by the way. So we didn't tell them which ones to choose. They went through the Balinese Digital Library, and there's thousands of works. As I said, they picked the ones, and it was really exciting to see. And we had all kinds of chats online about like fixing problems and getting everything to work. And so this really helped us figure out that our fonts were actually working. We have testers making better. So and there's a lot of great things that came out of this. Yeah.
Atlas. Was that a loan word?
Yeah.
Early on?
Yeah.
When?
Yeah.
When did that transfer over?
I don't know, but it was in the 19th century,
Okay,
or maybe the early 20th century.
gotcha.
That this was written. So the Dutch were in Indonesia. I mean, I don't know exactly, like, you know.
Thanks, just curious with the time.
Yeah, sure. And now we have this online platform that is open to the public, so you don't have to be anyone in particular, or, you know, you can just log in, create an account, log in, and pick a lontar and start typing. And then, you know, we have people who are looking over to check and stuff, but it's really up to the people in Bali, like, how they want to manage all of that. But I think it's fantastic. There's a community that is forming of young people who can talk to each other about this and contribute online, and just, you know, it's another way for them to share information. So, and those descriptions, you know, you see at the top, like, those can be edited by the community too. So it's not just necessarily the literal text, but you can add things on what it's about, translations, whatever you want. But the text is super useful. So that's what we started with. And writing the text is also sort of arguably the easiest thing, because you don't have to be like an interpreter of the text. You just have to be able to read it and understand it. So it also means that people who are like either in high school or in college who are getting started with this, things are, well, I know the alphabet, so I can, you know. And so you can bring a lot of people in that way, and it can be scaled up. So I'm just going to leave you with a little excerpt from the taxonomy of cats. And I tried to get, okay, so, and by the way, this is not about like whether the cat will be happy. It's about what it will bring to you as the owner. Why would you want this cat? And so, cat, you know, there's this thing about cats with the short tails being short, and that means like naturally short. There's these cats in Bali that have like they're not cut, they're just born with short tails. And some of them are short, some are long. It just depends on which cat, you know, in certain cases, just like cats are different colors. So those are somehow better. Certain spots, entirely black, not good apparently, which is too bad, you know, by the feed stereotype. If the cat's mute, you have to be careful because it's strong. So some of these are like, I don't really know, like, that's not, maybe that's saying like you can own it, but you gotta be careful. Like, it's really an open question to me. Like, what is the author of this really thinking? Like, why are they telling you this? Because it's like, they don't say like, for those of you who might want to own a cat, here's the things you need to know. They just sort of list cats and say, here's the things you got to know about these. And then it's you kind of interpret from that. It's like, it brings happiness that she'll always be with you. It's like, okay, that's why I would have this cat. There's another one that says, like, you have lots of guests showing up at your house wanting to talk to you. I didn't put that one in here, but like, you know, so those are clearly, anyway. So I just think it's fascinating. And I think that, to me, the take-home message from all this is like, and this was very consistent with what people in Bali told me, is like, we want to study our own literature. We can't just assume this is all sort of like sacred stuff no one will ever read. This is like everything we've ever written about everything in our culture, and so, you know, we need to study it in detail, and it's a lot of fascinating stuff. So I think that's it. I'll open it up for questions.